Hey everybody, I am Indy Pride from Milk and Cookies Total War, and I've got some relatively big Total War Warhammer news for you all. So if you've been following Total War Reddit, you would know that about a week or two ago, a new line was added to Total War Warhammer on the Steam database under the moniker White Dwarf. Now this is obviously referencing Grombrindal the White Dwarf, whose lore I'll quickly cover in a moment, but I honestly didn't think much of it at the time. Lots of companies add lines to the Steam database all the time with innocuous or purposely misleading names, and I think it's been pretty rare in CA's history where these lines so perfectly matched up with the content that was eventually released. In this case, though, I think CA meant to change the name or encrypt it, but Reddit users managed to catch sight of it before those changes could be made. And as it so happens, the White Dwarf is indeed going to be a DLC lord in Total War Warhammer, because there is a picture floating around of what is presumably the October or November issue of White Dwarf magazine with a 3D rendered Grombrindal on the cover with the caption, "Exclusive Free New Lord." Now this is already making people a bit nervous and making obviously some people very excited, because the DLC obviously isn't free if the code only comes with a White Dwarf magazine purchase, and the word exclusive sounds like the only way to get him is through White Dwarf magazine. We obviously don't have the details on what the DLC will entail yet, but in terms of timing, it would probably fall after the Wood Elves and before the Bretonnians are released in November, coinciding probably with a Greenskins and Dwarves Legendary Lord pack, along the same lines of what we got in the Grim in the Grave DLC. Now, it's entirely possible that the White Dwarf Legendary Lord will be made available to everyone via free LC. We've seen them do stuff like that in the past with like Vlad von Karsine, but we don't know for sure that's what's going to happen. He could just be included in whatever DLC CA decides to shove him into, but it does make you wonder why they added the word exclusive on the cover of the magazine. We'll see soon enough. So who is the White Dwarf, and why is he important in Warhammer lore? Well, Grombrindal, as he is known, is a unique special character, a mysterious dwarf warrior who sometimes appears out of nowhere when his Dawi brethren are in dire straits and in need of massive amounts of help to turn the tide of a particularly grim battle. So it's been hinted at many times, although I don't think it's ever been explicitly written, that the White Dwarf is actually the spirit of Snorri Whitebeard, the last High King of the Dwarfs before the War of Vengeance against the Elves of Ulthuan. So Snorri Whitebeard was a really, really big deal in his heyday. He was the eldest son of Grungni and Valea, who are the two most venerated of the dwarf ancestor gods. Grungni is the ancestor god of mining and stoneworking. He's the most important dwarf god in the dwarf pantheon, and Valea is the ancestor goddess of home and healing, the protector of the dwarf race, and arguably the second most important in the dwarf pantheon. So Snorri Whitebeard was literally the son of the dwarf pantheon itself, and funnily enough, he actually had an incredibly strong bond with Malekith before he became the Witch King. Which sounds a little bit weird because elves and dwarves typically hate each other, which is a different part of lore, which is I'll talk about maybe in another video, and I'll touch on it in this here too. So remember that the Dark Elves were once a part of Ulthuan and the High Elf race before the Sundering, and Malekith and Snorri had a totally great time chasing down the forces of chaos who still roamed the world during that age, and they struck up a bond, became good friends. They were actually such good friends that when Snorri finally lay dying from old age, and he was easily more than 1,000 years old at this point, he invited Malekith to see him on his deathbed, and Snorri asked him at that point, he asked Malekith to agree to his dying oath that dwarfs and elves would always be friends, to which Malekith agreed. Now, obviously we know that's not how things turned out. Malekith broke that oath by manipulating the dwarfs and the elves into a massively destructive war that essentially ruined both races and their economies and their civilizations. And I can't really stress it enough how important the War of Vengeance, also known as the War of the Beard, and the Sundering are to Warhammer lore. These stories are intertwined with almost every thread of lore in Warhammer. They even play a huge part in the story of the Wood Elves, which I'm currently covering in a separate lore video that will hopefully be up soon. But basically, the theory goes that this heinous betrayal of a sworn deathbed oath between two best friends was so powerful that it literally hauled Snorri's soul out of the dwarven afterlife, and ever since he has been determined to exact vengeance upon all enemies of the Dawi. So basically, the White Dwarf is an immortal spirit that rallies the dwarfs in their most dire times of need, and he's the son of dwarf gods. So yeah, he's a pretty big deal. Now, it is interesting, he's an 8th edition tabletop choice for the dwarfs, but I do need to mention this, and I don't think I've covered this yet, but I did get a quote from Joey, CA Joey, on the official forums, and she basically said that Creative Assembly isn't locked into any particular contract with GW where they have to do 8th edition lords and units, but they are obviously using 8th edition as the basis for Total War Warhammer because it's the most recent fantasy edition. So that is good news. That had not been confirmed yet, and I don't think I've ever told my subscribers this, that does mean they can delve into the lore or previous editions for lore choices and units. I've been discussing that in other previous lore videos, wondering if they're able to do that. Seems like they will be able to. That's been confirmed, I guess, now, but I'm still gonna believe it when I see it. We haven't seen it yet. Helman Gorst did not fall into that category, even though a lot of people use him as that exception to the rule, because he did have rules in the 8th edition supplement Sigmar's Blood. So he did have rules in 8th edition. He doesn't really break that mold of 8th edition tabletop characters. So now that we know the White Dwarf is coming, how is he going to play in Total War Warhammer? Well, in short, probably pretty boring, and that's coming from someone who doesn't personally love the playstyle of the dwarfs. I've always been a fan of more mobile and cavalry heavy armies, and that's certainly not how the dwarfs play, obviously. And I'm thoroughly happy for those of you who are dwarf fans. He is most certainly an iconic dwarf lord, considering his name is the title of Warhammer's official magazine. But he does fight dismounted, and he is a dwarf, so there's not a lot of mobility there. There's not a lot of interesting gameplay mechanics in and of himself. There is actually a tabletop model where he's carried into battle by Gotrek and Joseph Bugman on a shield, like shield bearers, but that's definitely not making it into the game because we haven't seen Gotrek and Joseph Bugman yet. Although, again, there was an interesting post on Reddit where there is a Gotrek line, actually it was a Felix line, talking to Gotrek in Total War Warhammer database files. So maybe Gotrek will get added at some point, but his model, when he gets added, is not going to be carried by Joseph Bugman and Gotrek Gurnison. So that's not going to be a different kind of mount choice for Dwarf Lords yet, I don't think, but maybe we'll get it soon enough, who knows. But he's going to be low mobility. He's going to hit pretty hard, as a lot of Dwarf Lords do, and probably get some cool buffs like what Vlad got with Vanguard deployment for all of his forces, or Gorst got with army-wide poison attacks. There's no way to guess what those will be yet, because they aren't from the tabletop and don't even make sense from a lore perspective, so it's just CA's way of differentiating lords somewhat. Being able to add those army-wide buffs does add some nice differentiation, and I like that they do that, but there's no lore precedent for it, so there's no real way to speculate on it without sounding dumb, so I'm not even going to try. It's a good thing that they do that kind of stuff. It's just, again, I can't really speculate right now. But, so focusing on the White Dwarf, he is unbreakable in the tabletop, which is cool. It means he shares that with Ungrim Iron Fist. And he does have one really cool rule in the tabletop called Disguised, where he can begin play hidden in any unit of infantry, and you don't have to reveal which unit he's in until the close combat phase, which basically represents the ability of his spirit to manifest in battle where he's most needed. But unfortunately, that's not going to carry over to Total War Warhammer because you can't place lords or heroes inside of units. And that really, I think, needs to change as this series moves forward, because it would fix so many annoying problems in this game. Being able to put a Lord in an infantry unit prevents them from getting sniped and helps out with a bunch of other stuff. So I would love to see Creative Assembly add a solution for Lords where you can literally just plop them in the middle of an infantry formation. It would suddenly make Kemmler and other units, other Lords who are very squishy, much more viable, I think, being able to protect them with an actual infantry unit. But that's, I guess, a discussion for another time. But that is the White Dwarf. He is coming to Total War Warhammer. If you're a Dawi fan or just a fan of Warhammer in general, you're probably going to be pretty excited that he's coming. In terms of gameplay, I don't think he's going to be the most exciting or interesting Lord ever introduced to the series, but I'm still happy that he's going to be making it in. Hopefully he will be a free Lord for everybody, and it won't be exclusive to getting the White Dwarf magazine, because I know a lot of people aren't going to want to pay for the White Dwarf magazine to get him. And if you have to pay for the White Dwarf magazine, is he really free? I don't know. That's a little bit iffy there. But I am currently working on a special lore video, and for this video, specifically the White Dwarf video, let's do some speculation in the comment section about what the rest of the White Dwarf DLC could be. Is it going to be its own separate DLC? Will it be a part of the Greenskins and Dwarfs Rivalry Lord Pack, which we know is coming, because we know that if they're going to do that for a Grim and Grave DLC, they have to do it for the Dwarfs and the Greenskins? Or is it going to be something completely separate? Let me know, and I will see you all in the next video. Peace.